Well, I think Parliamentary Review does something very interesting. It provides a platform for people to share and express their views, and I hope we're going to be able to build on that even more so that people can interconnect with each other. But it also gives an opportunity for parliamentarians to know that people are taking interest in what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that glances a keen and critical eye over leadership. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the leader of Her Majesty's most loyal opposition themselves, if only he were keen on media interviews. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We learn about why sterling is up or sliding, which CEOs the press have given a good chiding, and of course the innovation and success that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Plunkett, the former Home Secretary, former Education Secretary, and of course the current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Steve Collings, the Audit and Technical Director at Leavitt Walmsley Associates. Steve has been with the company for almost 20 years and spends many of his days lecturing on the CPD circuit and writing books on the sector. As for LWA, it has grown tremendously over the years since it was established in 1984 and has become award-winning along the way. They rightly pride themselves on being able to offer their clients some of the best insight in the market. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, or perhaps today that should be uncertainty. It's always nice to be able to talk to someone who knows what they are talking about. Steve, welcome.
Okay, thank you.
Well, it's been a good 6 months, I think, since Leavitt Walmsley Associates was in the review. I think the listeners would love to know, Steve, what's been happening with the company since publication?
Well, of course, there's quite a lot of activity going on in the accountancy and tax profession at the moment in terms of things like making tax digital.
Yes.
That's been quite a very big project of ours at the moment, getting all the clients ready for that.
And it's something we'll certainly be talking about later, I think.
Yes.
We could probably something we could talk about for 10 hours, but I don't think the listeners would put up with that. But go on, sorry.
So that's been quite an interesting sort of experience. We're not quite finished with that, but we are getting there. Of course, there's always changes in accountancy that we need to get to grips with as well. So we've been dealing with that. So the past 6 months have pretty much flown by, really.
Well, excellent. I know that LWA yourselves have been on the receiving end of quite a few industry awards over the years. And what do you think it is what sort of company values, I should say, do you think you have at LWA that make it the success it is today?
Well, we always strive to do our utmost best for the clients, which is pretty much the same for any accountancy practice. But we sort of get ourselves out there, and we keep abreast of all the leading, the main developments in accountancy and tax. We make sure that all our clients are up to speed with anything that affects them in that respect, particularly with tax. And we also try to help out other firms as well through articles and books and various other sorts of media that can help practitioners keep up with changes, which there's quite a lot of changes in our industry.
Absolutely. And more than that, I think I'm right in saying, Steve, you're completely spot on with the amount of changes the market faces. But because you deal at LWA with organisations in so many different sectors, manufacturing, solicitors, I think I'm right even saying quite a lot of schools, if that's right.
Yeah, we do deal with schools. I won't say a lot of schools because they're very, very sort of in depth in terms of the requirements and all that. So we need to make sure that we give every client the same level of service. We don't deal a lot with a lot of schools, but certainly with academy schools we do have dealings with them every year.
It must make it especially challenging for yourselves to just really to keep up to date with those changes.
It is. It's very challenging, to be honest. I mean, I myself, I go up and down the country lecturing to accountants on the continuing professional development circuit, the CPD circuit. So I keep up to date with all sorts of changes in that respect because I have to do. But it is a challenge trying to keep up with all the detailed changes, and we do it, but it's not easy.
No, of course, and I think LD, you've been around the firm since the mid-80s, I think, Steve, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah. Yeah,
so I think the changes, you really can't understate them since then. And I think we'll certainly discuss those more in depth in a moment or two. But it's come such a long way, the firm, and with so much being changed. Where do you see, I know that you're too busy to, at the minute, keeping ahead and working so hard, but where do you see the firm in another 5 years or so?
Well, I mean, we have got plans to continue to grow. We've now got 2 offices.
Manchester and Warrington, I think.
Manchester and Warrington, yeah. We are continuing to hopefully grow on that. Of course, we continue to recruit high quality staff. And if we carry on doing what we're doing now, then hopefully we can grow into quite a sizable firm in the next 5 years. I mean, we've seen a consistent theme of growth certainly over the last 10 years, which has been very helpful to sort of staff here that have grown with the practice, and we are going to keep on with that hopefully.
And you've already mentioned it, you travel an awful lot up and down the country, and you meet an awful lot of people in your business. So you must have a great feel, of what's going on with the bigger picture, perhaps, than a lot of other people might. What do you think right now is the biggest challenge that your industry is facing at the moment?
I think certainly changes in the way that the tax regime is going to work. That is something that is quite high on a lot of practitioners' priorities at the moment. Certainly more use of technology as well. I mean, we as a firm, we invest an awful lot in technology, and we use all the leading software and keep up to date with all developments in that area, and it moves so fast. I do meet a lot of accountants that do become quite exasperated with just how quick things do change nowadays. Certainly with accounting and tax, tax
absolutely
is known for changing. But I think in a lot of firms, particularly the smaller firms, the sole practitioners, there's the challenge of keeping up to date with absolutely everything. So I do see it from both ends of the spectrum, really.
And is it perhaps just the swiftness of the change these days more than anything? The regulations can change so frequently. It seems sometimes almost impossible.
Yeah, I mean, tax does do that. Financial reporting, so the rules issued by the Financial Reporting Council tend not to change sort of, that fast. I mean, there have been an awful lot of changes over the last 5 years, but the FRC do give a lot of lead time to give practices a chance to understand new requirements or changed requirements so that they can plan how they're going to implement the changes and notify clients and all that sort of thing. So in terms of the accounting rules, they do change a lot, but they tend to not change overnight. Whereas obviously in some areas tax can change quite a lot.
Yes, and I think given the current political climate, we might be a few more of those changes fairly soon.
I would imagine so. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've already brought it up, of course, yourself. You have a dedicated tax department, and I think it was the March 2015 budget where making tax digital was first mentioned.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's certainly been a scheme you can't get away from. How have you all found dealing with the change that's brought about?
Well, I mean, we've put an element. We've got a detailed program. So we have a couple of members of staff who are working with clients to get their books and records sort of automated in sort of software that will be making tax digital compliant. That in itself, it has not been easy because obviously you have clients that are very reluctant to digitise the way that they do the books and records. Very, very small clients, for example, are quite reluctant to move over to software, and they do actually think that in some cases it's us that are implementing this, and unfortunately the government has made it mandatory. So that's been a bit of a learning, a very steep learning curve, should I say, for both ourselves and our clients.
And I think it's 2020 the deadline.
Well, I think VAT returns are already making tax digital. You have to do those, and I think next year there'll be further reporting requirements that are required for the making tax digital regime, but certainly at the moment clients' VAT returns are being done through the making tax digital.
Well, good luck with the rest of it. I'm not too envious. Now, so we've talked about a number, I suppose, of policy areas then already. If you were Chancellor for 5 hours in the afternoon after lunch sometime, if you could do one thing, what is it you would do?
Well, I bet a lot of people would say get rid of making tax digital.
You're not allowed to say that.
If I could do absolutely anything as Chancellor, then I would kick off a programme of simplifying the tax system.
And I think you're echoing an awful lot of people's thoughts there. It can't be done soon enough, I think.
No. The legislation. A lot of my friends are tax writers, and they get the legislation through every year, and the legislation is huge, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Absolutely. One piece of A4 should do the trick, shouldn't it? That's all you need.
I'm not sure we could go that far.
We could try.
I could get a lot of fans if I did do that, but I don't think that's going to happen.
No, perhaps not. But speaking of, I suppose, policy, it would certainly be a remiss of us if we are speaking during quite an unusual political and economic time for the country. That might be a bit of an understatement. And I know you'll have thoughts about this, that we've got it's very possible the next Prime Minister is going to try and leave the European Union without a treaty. What do you think that potentially, it's a big question, I know, but a no-deal Brexit, as it were, would mean for business, and especially the businesses you deal with on a day-to-day basis?
Well, everybody's quite nervous about this because and it's not just the clients. The clients are suffering because of this uncertainty. But it's a lot of our clients deal with overseas suppliers and overseas customers who are beginning to take action about Brexit now. I personally would like to see Britain leave the EU with a deal, because from a personal perspective, I think it would make things a lot easier. I would hope that the next Prime Minister does have some sort of contingency plan in the event that we don't have a deal.
Yes.
But it's certainly proving to be quite a nervous time in business.
Because I could only imagine so many of your clients were probably quite, braced for the 29th of March. And when that didn't happen, it's sort of a limbo period almost.
It is, and you listen to Jeremy Hunt, who says that the 31st of October isn't an actual rigid deadline. And you think, well, where's this going to go now? Is this going to happen or isn't it going to happen? And that doesn't help businesses as such, because it just creates even more and more uncertainty.
Exactly, and that is the enemy of business, without a doubt.
It is, and I think sometimes if they would just sort of possibly spend a day or two in a business and listen to business owners and try and understand what uncertainty actually does for them, and in some cases it can be quite significant. Suppliers overseas could turn around and say, we aren't going to supply you on credit anymore because of all the Brexit thing. We're beginning to see suppliers getting quite nervous anyway, and customers and things like that. So it's in my view, it's gone on long enough now. So we do need to either get out of the EU or stay in it, whatever, but we can't keep having extension after extension after extension.
Yes, it does no one any good. And later on in following this podcast, it's an interview with Lord Blunkett, and he does mention the fact that you've alluded to it. Perhaps politicians and politics in general could learn one or two things from businesses, especially when it comes to having to make decisions in leadership. And you can't help but feel yes, there is a bit of a void there these days.
I think there is. I mean, you do see politicians going out on the TV, around businesses and things like that. And I'm sure that they have sort of had conversations with directors and business owners and people like that. But the reality is that any more uncertainty is not going to be beneficial at all for any businesses. So, as I say, ideally we would leave the EU with a deal. But if not, I do think it should now be that, if we are going to go on the 31st of October, we should go.
Absolutely.
Whether Boris Johnson gets in and whether he does what he promises, I don't know. But I get a bit nervous about how...
He might not even know yet, Steve. We'll find out. But next time we speak, we'll see. Now, I know perhaps this might be an appropriate time to mention it. You alluded to it earlier when you were hiring new staff people. What is it? You've been in business for a while now. It's fair to say. What would you say to young people that are looking to get into your industry, that are looking to get in the world of work? What advice would you offer to them?
My advice definitely would be to work hard. Don't expect things to happen overnight, particularly if you are going to come into accountancy or tax. You've got to work hard, brush up on things like interview techniques, because unlike it wasn't like this when I first started work. It was a lot easier when I started work. But nowadays, I mean, when apprenticeship programs open up, there are an awful lot of applicants. So the market is can choose the creme de la creme, really. So, make sure you've got an impressive CV. Make sure you do a lot of research into the company before you go for any interviews. But like I say, the key is once you get your foot in the door, you've got to really work hard and prove yourself. It's not easy.
I think sound advice. Steve, thank you very much for joining us. And
no problem at all.
No doubt we'll speak again before long.
We will do. Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Goodbye. I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Steve, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector. If the only things inevitable in life are death and taxes, it's a good thing that there are people out there who at least know about the former. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, David Blunkett. Lord Blunkett served as Home and Education Secretary in Tony Blair's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2015. Outside of politics, he's the Vice President of the Royal National Institute of Blind People and the National Alzheimer's Society, and when he has the time, he can be found cheering on his team, Sheffield Wednesday. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to David. Here it is now.
We're now joined by Lord Blunkett. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Now, it would probably be remiss of me if I didn't start, given the recent events in Parliament. I didn't ask you, given your 32 years in that place, about your thoughts regarding the unprecedented situation I think the public are looking at the minute.
Well, I think I see it very much like Joe Public. I see it as though I'm looking at something that is made up, that is scripted, that is like almost a sci-fi film where anything can happen and then anything does happen. And I'm very sad about that because I think that it's damaged our parliamentary democracy. I think that it's brought politics into disrepute, and I think it's created anger on all sides, whether people were strongly in favour of remaining or whether they were, as we call them, Brexiteers.
Absolutely. And given that situation, whether it's going to be a general election, many people are beginning to worry about how apathy taking effect.
Well, I'm worried about two things. Apathy in the respect of turnout and whether people vote, and anger and, if you like, the friction developed into a failure to be able to have a democratic dialogue, so that the respect that we have for each other, that the way in which we debate issues is often now broken down, and there's abuse in the street, not just of people because they're considered to be different or foreign, but because people recognise they have a different point of view. Now, that is new. I've been around in formal politics now for, goodness, almost all my adult life, because I was elected to a local authority in my city of Sheffield when I was 22. And I've never seen that. I've seen people get very annoyed, and that's fine, and people should get angry, but I've never experienced them display it in such personal venom before. And we need to calm that, because our democracy depends on people being able to have genuine disagreements and differences and to work them through the political process. Otherwise, we fall, as history teaches us, into the hands of extremists.
Absolutely. And given that you've just said what you just said, a lot of people are talking now about whether the party structure, which does exist at the minute, it can survive. We've seen both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party showing signs of buckling.
I think the political system the party system will survive. It may have a very rocky time in the near future, but I think it'll right itself. But it will only do that if political parties themselves sort out what's going on internally. I think both major parties have been, to use an old phrase, infiltrated. Came across a prominent minister just outside the cabinet whose current chair of their Conservative association was the UKIP candidate against him back in 2015. We know about the challenges within the Labour Party and the way in which people who were thrown out of the party have either been able to or are seeking to rejoin. And so we've got this two-ender, if you like, the bread in the two sides of the sandwich coming together, and the middle is being squeezed. Now, there's academic work to say that actually the electorate aren't all that keen on centre parties, particularly at the moment. And I think we need to be wary of believing that the creation of some sort of centrist party in Britain would solve the problem. It would temporarily, but it wouldn't resolve the differences that people have and how we work them through.
A lot of people have been suggesting recently that the only way out of this situation is with a second referendum. And I right in saying that you have quite reluctantly come to that position yourself.
took me a very long time to come to the conclusion that we would need an affirmative vote. I resisted it because I come from and represented an area deeply disaffected, feeling the effects of deindustrialization and then the austerity measures on the back of the global meltdown, and felt in my bones, which is why I wasn't one of those who thought we were easily going to win the referendum for Remain in 2016, that you need to deal with the underlying problems and causes of that disaffection. And the simple slogan, "They didn't hear you the first time, tell them again," could be very effective, a kind of Trumpian slogan that could be adopted by those who are very, very vehement Brexiteers. However, I think given the state that we're in, I came to the conclusion a few weeks ago, and I wrote in the Daily Telegraph, that I think the only way to deal with this is to get an agreement for this interim period, because that's what it is, a transition from where we are to where we might be, and then put that to the British people. And if the British people don't like that negotiated agreement, either Theresa May's original or something that emerges from the discussions and the debate and the toing and froing between the two major parties, put that to the electorate and give them a chance 3 years on from 2016 to make a new choice as to whether that's what they want to go for, that's the direction they want to take, or whether they'd like to take a step back and remain in the European Union.
And do you think that the people of Sheffield that did vote Leave, many of whom voting for the first time in decades or the first time ever, do you think that they would feel maybe slightly frustrated at the call for a second vote?
Yes, I think they would. And I think we just have to be really honest about that. There would be a great deal of frustration, bordering on anger, people saying, we gave you the message, why didn't you just do it? And we have to be straight with them. The reason it's been complex, the reason it's taken this time, the reason that we are in the undoubted mess we're in, is because it wasn't simple. You didn't, as some people thought, sign a bit of paper and walk away. This is a complex, interconnected, economically, socially, in terms of our trade and our relationships, not just within the European Union, but with the European Union's agreements across the world. This is a complex issue. And to pretend otherwise is not to give people what they want, it's to patronize them and say, yes, we don't think you were wrong. We don't think that you got it wrong when you thought it was a simple way out. I think you just have to be straight with them, and they'll be angry. I mean, people are angry with me when I walk around in my own constituency and say, what are you up to? And I say, I'm up to trying to speak the truth. I'm up to trying to say it as it is, as I always have done.
Absolutely. Now, given all of that, one would expect the governing party to perhaps be somewhere between 20 points and to 30 points behind the opinion polls, but they are not. And there has been an awful lot of criticism of the leadership of the opposition regarding that. Would you have any advice for the leadership of your party?
Well, I think belatedly, from the beginning of April, the two parties realised that they were going to sink separately if they didn't actually try and make an effort and at least display some endeavour to work together. I think had there been two different leaders post-2016 referendum, this would have happened a great deal earlier. It hasn't, but it can now. And it is remarkable that in the circumstances that the government have found themselves, not just in not being able to get the kind of deal that some people wanted, but even being able to hold all their party together, but actually being totally riven publicly with cabinet responsibility having broken down, to find themselves only marginally behind, or even on opinion polls through March, marginally in front of the Labour Party, is astonishing. And once this period is over, I think Labour will need to take a very long, hard look at why the British people have not turned, as they often do, to what is called Her Majesty's opposition. There are very complex reasons for that, including the fact that the leadership of the party have only realised, I think, very, very recently that you have to reach out to people whose views you don't agree with, and you have to win them over to something more than what the issues and the policies and the ideology you thought of in the first place.
And on that point, you'll be aware, certainly, that the Parliamentary Review itself has been dedicated to showcasing leadership in all its forms across the country. Now, speaking to many of our contributors, they have made clear that they do feel that leadership has been lacking, both from the government and opposition, as you've said. In your many years in politics, is there a time in certainly recent history where there has been perhaps a leadership vacuum like we're seeing today?
I think we find in Britain an interesting paradox. People want strong leaders, but they want leaders that listen and are responsive. And the two don't always go together. I've lived through the period of both Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, two leaders who knew what they wanted to do and were prepared to put it on the line. I've lived through Ted Heath and John Major, who were less clear. Ted Heath on Europe, yes, but not on much else. John Major really trying to mop up after the controversial and divisive Thatcher era, where they showed a different style of leadership. Now, they were portrayed as being weak. I don't think that's always the case. I think that you can have leaders who are very clear what they want to do, but to turn on its head the Marxist slogan, speak softly and walk with a big stick, they can actually do the job clearly and decisively. Clem Attlee was such a person, and in many ways so is Harold Macmillan. And those are the kind of leaders where you don't get bombast, you don't get, I know best and I'm going to push this through, but you actually get someone who can genuinely create a coalition of the willing, but has a clear idea about their values. And I hope we'll return to that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the strengths of the review has always been its sense of bipartisanship.
Well, I think Parliamentary Review does something very interesting. It provides a platform for people to share and express their views, and I hope we're going to be able to build on that even more so that people can interconnect with each other. But it also gives an opportunity for parliamentarians to know that people are taking interest in what they're doing and how they're doing it, and therefore to get the message that they've got to reflect outwards. We need both. We need the input into the system. We need voices. We need ideas. We need experiences through Parliamentary Review inwards, but we also need to ensure that the way in which our politics works is reflected outwards, so that people firstly understand how the system works, secondly the complexity and difficulty of it, and thirdly the way in which they need to tell us, I mean I'm in the upper house now, but to tell us as parliamentarians what they think and where we're going wrong, and for us to listen.
Absolutely. And on that point, you've been in public service for most of your life, Lord Blunkett, ever since Sheffield City Council. I mean, in that time, what are the key lessons you think you've learned in the best way for policymakers and those at the coalface to communicate and work together?
I've learned that actually there is enormous wisdom out there, and if you're prepared to engage and to listen, then your views might actually change. Mine have on a number of issues, particularly social issues, what small L liberal issues over the years, going in the opposite direction, it has to be said, to most people as they age. And you need to ensure that you've reached out to sufficient people to create that coalition that allows you to make progress, and that you won't create everything you want and change everything you want for the better overnight. It will never happen. There's no days where everything's done and we can all wash our hands of it and that's fine. We build building blocks. We stand, if you like, historically on the shoulders of those who came before us. And if we get that message, we won't be too frustrated when everything doesn't happen immediately, but we'll be determined to make progress, and we'll punish politically, democratically, those who don't.
Absolutely. And perhaps finally, with that concluding point, it's fair to say, as you've already mentioned, a lot of the population are frustrated, no matter how they vote in the referendum or their general political opinions. But perhaps, for those people, is there something you'd point to be optimistic, looking towards the future about?
I think I'm very clear. We're a great nation. We can't just do things on our own. We have to recognise that we live in an incredibly rapidly growing global environment, and the power sources and the power politically has changed over the last 20, 30 years. But we are creative, we are innovative, and we will pull through, and we'll do it because we won't have anyone else to blame anymore if we come out of the European Union, and we'll need to literally pull our socks up and do it ourselves. In the end, my message is clear. Nothing is ever as good as it seems at the time, and nothing is ever as bad. And we've come through difficult times in the past, and we'll come through again.
Lord Blunkett, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off the Chew Chairman to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit our website at www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.